The second phase will be a phase that I'll actually chair, which will be taking all of that information, putting together, working with all of our economic development offices throughout the region, working with our post-secondary institutions, some of our major business leaders, and taking that data and trying to put that strategy in action. How can we actually make what we get work? And that's what this is all about, is that we don't want this to be another report that sits in the briefcase that I can pull out 10 years from now. I want this report that we can pull out like our economic development strategy and say, these are the 32 recommendations, and this is what we have done so far. And that's what I think we all need, and we should all be demanding out of everything that we do, because all of us have seen too many reports that gather dust and are paperweight, but haven't fundamentally changed things. It's time for us to do the business differently, and this is hopefully a start for us to do that. The next few slides really are just kind of timelines of when things have been scheduled for. Again, nothing that I need to go over in detail. All of this is available, by the way, if you want to get information on the project through the County of Simcoe's economic development website, which is edo.simcoe.ca. And there's a separate tab on there for the labor market project. But basically, the whole timeline is to have the project wrapped up by March 2014. So we have a lot of work to do, obviously, over the next little while. And like I said, those are the outcomes that we kind of talked about. I think about the end of my 15 minutes of my paid commercial. And I'll be happy to take any questions or answers. So, investor.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Robert. My life obviously isn't working.
It's working there. Now it's working. It just needed a good bang on the table. That's higher technology. So I just think that as we listen to our speakers today, that it was interesting for Robert to say there's not going to be one answer to fit all the questions we have in Simcoe County, because Simcoe County will continue to change and grow. And I didn't like to hear the perception by some people that Simcoe County was not sophisticated enough to attract new employment opportunities. But sometimes perception's reality. So I think that we can start changing that perception by other people. And whether we're a small or medium business or a large business, we need to take the first steps, because it all starts with the first steps. But if any of you have any questions for Robert, I'm sure he'd love to answer some questions with you. Yes. All right, but as we get closer to lunchtime, the questions get fewer and shorter. Did you notice that? I know, you're counting on that. All right, here's some of the questions.
I just have a little worry about the numbers for population and whatnot. Being somebody who just came to this area 10 years ago, and seeing the slides both from Sandra, I believe, and from you, talking about the 667,000 people by 19 years from now, 18, 19 years. And those are based on 2006 figures, obviously, which were put out prior to the biggest economic meltdown most of us have ever seen. And I'm wondering, I'm kind of worried that almost all of the information we're seeing is going to change a great deal once we see 2011 reports that reflect everything that's happened employment-wise, business-wise, since 2008. I also find it scary that all of the biggest employers that I saw were all on the taxpayer's ticket. And if those close to 700,000 people come here, and I agree with you, your number's crap for one, I also have a fear that of whatever number of jobs there will be, that one man, one woman are working 2 or 3 of those jobs while somebody else can't get one. So I don't even know what my question really is. It's more of a fear of what I'm seeing.
It is multiple questions, and they're all very legitimate. And I guess one of the things that you take a look at the time frame, and yes, we've just come through 2 very bad years, but when this was put together, basically they were looking at a 25-year window. And if you go through history, and we didn't even look at the history of our last 50 years, we've gone through cycles. Some point in time during the 25 years that has kind of a hiccup. So they're looking at historical trends, they're looking at the pressures. Will the numbers change? Yes, they could change up, they could change, not likely up, but they could change down. But the reality is we still know people are coming. And the reality is, we still know we need to create employment opportunities for them. And the numbers, as you saw, are based upon, I'm not a planner, so I'm trying to get this in out of planning world and into the real world. Right now, part of the exercise, the province of Ontario required every one of the municipalities, so all 18 municipalities, to sit down and allocate where their growth is going to be, what type of growth it would be. They have to hit density numbers and all the rest of it. So those numbers are all dictated by areas that, as of right now, are designated as growth areas. So that is one of the good things is that number is being achieved without impacting any of our non-rural areas. So everybody's already been designated in their official plans to accommodate those numbers. As well, the side that still worries me is the employment side. And under the Simcoe County Growth Plan, really we had 4 major employment nodes that were identified for new growth. The Bradford Exchange lands down just north of the Holland Marsh, the Innisfil Heights lands, the Lake Simcoe Regional Airport lands, and the Railroad Corridor, which is the 4th other major employment area. So I'm still concerned as to where we create lands. I'm always concerned about the impact the pressures of development have as people try to take employment lands out of designation. Because I think it's very important that we understand we need to allow those, even if it takes 25 or 30 years for those lands to develop, we need to allow for it if we're going to provide employment opportunities. We also know that the new workforce isn't necessarily going to be manufacturing as per se. It could be in different ways. And one of the other planning things that we have to take into consideration are the number of people that are, becoming entrepreneurs, working out of their house, or having smaller type businesses. How do we look at the zoning that takes place within our residential communities that would allow, people to be working in their homes and maybe have an employee or two, which has always been the big concern about, the increase of traffic in residential communities and parking on the street, or our parking lots big enough. So all of those now have to be looked at very realistically from both the provincial level and at the local levels, to allow us to accommodate the new emerging economy that's starting to take place. So, and yes, the major employer list, as you say, one of the things that you notice on it is a lot of it is heavily government related. The saving grace is that even though, yes, we'll be having a downturn in the number of people working in government, they hopefully won't be impacted the way, it helps to provide more stability overall. We're actually lucky, and when you look at the impact of the last recession, throughout all of Simcoe County, were we hit? Absolutely. There wasn't any part of the region that wasn't hit, but were we hit as hard as some of the other areas? No. And one of the reasons we weren't hit as hard as some of the other areas, just going back to the slides that you showed earlier, what you do notice about the County of Simcoe and our region economy is it's not heavily invested in any one area. We actually have a fairly stable workforce with jobs in multiple sectors, so that as one sector had a major hit, a downturn, it didn't turn our whole region into an economic disaster zone. Yes, like I said, we had impacts, but it could have been a lot worse, and it was a lot worse in a whole lot of other areas of Ontario.
Oh, another question back there.
How do you see this project being linked with the Digging Deeper initiative that was released this summer?
The Digging Deeper, and I apologize for not mentioning it earlier, it was kind of a cursory look, simply a survey basically dealing with our employment resource agencies and dealing with employers and looking at where they're going. This is a whole new level. This is like taking a look at a snapshot through the whole. I believe in the end there was about 350 respondents to the survey. We're hoping that this, if we're not at the 2,000 to 3,000 level of businesses hit, I'll literally be disappointed. We want to take Digging Deeper and make it a whole so big that because we want as much information as we can get. Plus, we also want to deal with a sector that wasn't dealt with, and that is the actual employees themselves and where they're working, what their skill sets are, and where they're going to work. So the Digging Deeper will be looked at, it will be a component of it, but this is a much more in-depth survey.
I believe we had one more question up here right at the very front, and I guess that will be the last question that we have.
Right up here.
Just a little, I'm not sure how relevant it is. Yesterday I heard on CBC Radio a report about the fact that Canada now has twice the number of temporary workers being brought into the country. And that concerns me because they're considered temporary workers and they're not really contributing in ways that businesses could really contribute and create productivity and develop retention and all that sort of thing. I didn't notice any numbers or statistics about that in what we saw. I'm just curious to know if those numbers show up anywhere or is that an issue for this region?
It is an issue in some industries for us, especially on the agricultural side. We know that there are approximately 500 people working in Simcoe County as temporary laborers in the agricultural side, mainly down in kind of the Holland Marsh area. But yes, it is an issue, but it's also an issue we have to ask ourselves, why are those positions not being filled by people here? And often it comes down to the conditions, not wanting to work in them, not wanting to work for enough money. There's all kinds of different issues that it's a bigger and broader social issue. But we do know that, if the carrots don't get pulled from the Holland Marsh, we're not going to make it to market. So it is one of those very tricky situations to deal with, but absolutely one you need to be working with.
Tourism as well.
Tourism as well, absolutely. Yeah. Hotels, ski resorts, having to, find good quality employees that are going to be working for 2 or 3 months, and, Lord knows, let's keep our fingers crossed we get snow this winter so we have, a stronger ski season than we have in other years and the rest of it, so, because it is a major part of our economy.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, everyone. You can line up now for lunch. There's just one thing I think that we should do just before we do that. We should thank the Workplace Development Board and thank Susan Laycock for putting this all together. Hope you've enjoyed your morning.
God said, I'm sure it's going to say.
In our presentations again, okay? Thank you. In our presentations again, okay? Thank you. Hello again. If anybody is looking for where they're supposed to hand in their evaluation forms, it's over on that far wall there under the sign, the evaluation forms, and you can see some baskets there. So that's where you hand them in. And I think we're just about ready to get started now if everyone's ready. But welcome back. I hope you enjoyed your lunch. And there's no such thing as a free lunch. In exchange for your lunch now, you need to fill out an evaluation form. Pass that in. All right. I'm extremely happy to introduce our keynote speaker, Max Valiquette. In addition to Max's activities that you would have seen listed on the screen, he's hosted TV's Ontario Box Talk, a youth issues talk show, and has appeared on Much Music, CBC Television, and Global TV. Max has served 3 times as chairperson of Strategy Magazine's Understanding Youth Conference. He previously performed as a sketch comedian in Toronto, including a performance at Second City. I know that you will learn something from his presentation, and you're going to be entertained at the same time. So welcome, Max.
So, hi everybody. Hi. Thank you very much for having me here. Over the course of the next hour and 20 minutes or so, it's my job to help everybody in the room understand young people, which is a kind of daunting task. So before I start, just a couple of things. This is going to be a fairly dense presentation. There will be quite a lot up on the screen. I'm going to say a lot. As some of you may have guessed, I speak rather quickly. But I will make a copy of this as a PDF available to you, and so don't worry about taking notes or staying awake. If you don't want to, I'll make sure there's a copy of the presentation. You guys can all get electronically after. A little bit about me before I start. My background is in what we would call strategic planning, meaning for the past 15 years or so, I've helped my clients understand how to connect better to their end users or their consumers or their citizens and engage them in a meaningful fashion. For about 9 years, I ran a company called Youthography, which was a youth market research and consulting firm. And since then, I've moved on to an ad agency called Ben Simon Byrne. In the middle of that, as was mentioned, I've done a lot of work in TV and media, including hosting a youth issues talk show called Vox Talk. That's me having an Oprah moment right there. You will all have to get in a car today, so don't do this. So the focus of this slide is really just to explain to people that while a lot of what I do is from a business perspective, I've also had the great fortune of talking to a huge number of young Canadians about the personal issues, the social issues that matter to them. I'm going to bring all of that together. Where I work and play right now is at an ad agency in downtown Toronto called Ben Simon Byrne. If you've seen Scotiabank advertising or Loblaws advertising, that's us. We're probably best known for a Molson Canadian ad from about 10 years ago called The Rant, where a guy said, "My name is Joe and I am Canadian." So, I don't know if you're applauding me or the beer, but I would take it either way. And one last thing that I want to mention is we also have a PR firm and a web design firm that's a part of our shop. So when I talk about marketing recommendations, it doesn't mean exclusively advertising. Sometimes it means digital, sometimes it means PR, but we'll explain that as we go along. Here's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to start with some context in the form of demographics, because nothing says a kick-ass presentation like a bunch of statistics to start it off. I'm then going to talk about social networks in a section I call Me to Me. We'll talk about youth culture in transition, a little bit about work, and there will be time for Q&A at the end. Although I have to be honest, it's not a huge room, so if there's something that's really pressing and you feel comfortable during the presentation, you can put your hand up, you can ask a question. I will repeat it back to the rest of the room and we can have a bit of a conversation. And I know there's some people here who are francophones, so vous pouvez me demander des questions en français aussi, if it works for you. And a little bit of Polish, no, I can't actually. Let's start first of all with understanding youth. I always like to begin with statistics because actually we learn an awful lot about a particular group of people, sometimes just by understanding some enormous statistical numbers. And with young people, it's no different. The key to first and foremost understanding young Canadians is understanding what I call the 5 by 5 factor. That is to say that the very broadest definition of youth that I have at 10 to 34 years old divides for the first time very neatly into 5 equal 5-year cohorts. 10 to 14, 15 to 19, 20 to 24, 25 to 29, and 30 to 34 are all roughly the same percentage of the population. That's never happened before. 20 years ago or so, everything you heard about was Generation X. Movies, music, fashion, everything. It was all directed towards that group. And that's because that 20 to 29-year-old group was very much overrepresented at the time. About 10 years ago, due to a very weird statistical blip in which we saw immigration patterns change and also birth rate change quite dramatically, we actually were overrepresented in 10 to 14-year-olds, not just in Canada, but in the United States and most Western nations. Right now you can see 10 to 14 is about 6% of the population. It was almost 9% of the population across all of North America. That group was overrepresented, so it drove all trends. It's why Britney Spears and NSYNC and Backstreet Boys were all inflicted on us at exactly the same time. There is now not one subgroup of young people with the numbers to artificially drive trends, and it's why this very broad group behaves more cohesively. They are more evenly distributed, and therefore they act much more as a whole. At the same time, some other things have changed. Do you know that 83% of families with kids at home have only 1 or 2 children living at home? The average number of kids per Canadian household is now 1.9. It's never been that low. So one of the big reasons, and we're going to talk about this, is that young people connect with their friends in so much more of a dramatic fashion than any previous generation is simply this. There are fewer kids their own age to hang out with inside the family home. You want to play a game of shinny in the driveway? Well, if you don't have a brother to do it with, you are naturally going elsewhere. We hear a lot about this sort of lack of focus on the family and how everything has changed, but honestly, some of it just has to do with the demographics of it. Young people like to connect with people their own age, and that means they're leaving the house at this point. We also have less time to spend together as families. 3/4 of women work outside the home That number's at an all-time high. The majority of those who do work outside the home full-time. That number's also at an all-time high. But it's not just those things. Canadian families report having an hour less time to spend together every week than they did versus just 10 years ago. Our family structure is traditional. 42% of Canadian families are non-nuclear families, with common law families being a big thing, divorced or blended families coming together, a la Brady Bunch being a big thing. That's good, I'm making a youth culture presentation. And my first reference is to a 40-year-old television channel. Awesome. halfway through the presentation is going to be terrific. As well, single-parent families are on the rise. Something like 16% of Canadian families are now single-parent households. 3/4 or 4/5 of those are female-headed single-parent households. You know, if you're in any family structure, be it traditional or non-traditional, that time is at a premium these days, but especially if you are not in a traditional nuclear family, and it is more and more likely that you are, time is the first thing to go out the window. So our young people have less time to spend with their parents as well. Hence, more involvement and more engagement in what's going on outside the house. All of this led a young kid in a focus group I did a little while ago to say, 3:30 to 5:30 is my chill time. He said, it's my time for me alone at home. Like after a really brutal day in grade 10, he's shaking a martini or something. I see him relaxing with the Wall Street Journal and a smoking jacket or something. All that being said, they are staying at home longer. Hands up if you have kids at home. 44% of 20 to 29-year-olds still live in the family home. Hands up if you regret having kids there. Now that number is obviously much higher in the 20 to 25-year-old age range, but a quarter of 25 to 29-year-olds still live in the family home. They're staying home longer. So keep that in mind as we go through this presentation, because I'm already hopefully starting to paint a picture of a young person that is kind of focused more on what's happening outside the home and yet being there longer. You're going to notice that they're kind of doing one thing and kind of doing a contradiction. It's sort of a theme for youth culture in the year 2012. In fact, one of the things we're noticing is they are kind of entering adulthood